Hello, everyone. Happy, gorgeous Wednesday. Yes, folks, it is that time of the day, the week. This is how we do it on Wednesday mornings. Hello, my name is Sadie Uribe, and I'm the media producer for the Los Angeles Regional SBDC. And if this is your first time joining us, let me give you a little intro about the SBDC. The SBDC is a national program with over 1,000 locations across the country, helping to stimulate economic growth through business advising and development. The LASBDC offers no-cost services through funding provided by the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, and from the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. It's your tax dollars at work. The Los Angeles Regional SBDC network operates 7 service locations throughout Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. Our services are also offered virtually. We are here to help. We empower small business owners by offering tailored solutions through personalized one-on-one business advising, cutting-edge workshops, and comprehensive programs, all provided at no cost. We are dedicating to supporting your entrepreneurial journey every step of the way. So on that note, I am going to kick it off to Lori. Lori, you are looking ravishing as always.
Well, welcome everybody. So here's the fun thing for today. I found out 10 minutes ago?
Maybe,
Our
yeah,
guest.
maybe 10. But there was a story
Oh,
before I shared the information.
yeah, about 10 minutes ago. The thing is always check your emails, very current. And I was talking about today's guest, and Sadie says, "Did you see the email?" No. Oh, he's got food poisoning. Oh, okay. So here I am, guys. I was going to have Ask Lori anything next week because of the holiday. We can either turn off right now and all go away. I know you guys don't want to do that. Or we can just chat like we do on Ask Lori Anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just ask Lori. Look at everybody. Chris is like, Ask Lori. Okay. So literally 5 minutes ago, I had nothing planned. I am just here hanging out with you guys, but I am going to go ahead and start doing my Lori's Corner. I'm just going to go into that. I got my full lineup for July, but now I'm switching some things around. So I'm going to just tell you next week who's going to be here. And I don't know. So everything's up for grabs right now. So with no further ado, let's at least get into Lori's Corner, because what I had planned is that Lori's Corner was going to start something for next week, and maybe this will just launch into something. I don't know. We're going to be spontaneous. That's really my theory lately, and we're going to be spontaneous. So here we go. Let's just jump right into Lori's Corner, and you guys just have to bear with me today as I'm just dancing around and doing the best I can. Okay, here's what I wanted to talk about. So here's Lori's Corner. I've been noticing something, and we can elaborate on it, and I'll give you some more facts behind where this is coming from. But it's becoming more and more common. And like I always say, especially with newer entrepreneurs, those in the 40s, 50s that have been entrepreneurs for 20, 30 years, I don't see these type of things, but you can be in your 40s and 50s and be a newer entrepreneur. So I am not saying anything about age here. I'm just saying someone that would be more influenced by other people's advice. They don't have the experience, and everybody, and myself included, are new on certain topics. That's the way life is. There's something we don't have the experience. When we don't have the experience, we don't have what I like to talk about a lot is the wisdom. It's not about core intelligence. It's not about, as we used to say, book learning, right? Sometimes it's the experience of knowing what works and doesn't work that helps us to know what to listen to and not what to listen to, is really what I'm saying. So what I'm noticing is that, and you'll hear as I speak of this, different things I've talked to you guys about, different topics, but I'm kind of bundling it together where I'm going a higher level of thought behind it. So let me get started so you can see where I'm going with this. Individuals are jumping straight into what I'm calling long-term decisions. And when I'm speaking about, I'm not saying I notice this a little bit. I notice this if I got 8 calls in a week. I'm noticing this on 4 of the calls, 50% of the time, guys. This isn't something small. And I was trying to put my head around it to speak about it outwardly. And I always end up going into my deep thought processes of trying to find the root cause and the philosophy behind why things are happening the way they are. That's just kind of who I am. So what do I mean by they're jumping straight into long-term decisions? I'm referring to things such as trademarks, LLCs, tax structures, incorporation. So I'm talking about a newer entrepreneur maybe hasn't done anything or just maybe done a few things, calling in to the SBDC and meeting with me to determine whether they should be a C corporation, whether they should trademark, if they're not even sold anything and they're low risk, whether they should be an LLC. I had somebody send a question for today. I'm just starting. I haven't started yet. I won't be making money for at least a year. This is just an email, in the questions. And I'm wondering what tax structure to follow. I'm like, excuse me, you're following a beautiful one. You don't owe taxes, not being profitable. You can't say I can owe less taxes than not being profitable. So why are you not profitable and discussing a tax structure? Now, this is not anything against the individual, okay? These are younger people that don't have this experience. So they get all this hype and they hear, people talking about tax structures. And I have worked for millionaire clients quite a lot and even a billionaire client. And believe me, they don't talk about tax structures as much as people who don't even owe that much in taxes do. Now, I'm all for tax structures. I'm an enrolled agent, obviously. And I always said that I was going to be an advisor for the rich and famous, help on tax structure. So it's not something I'm not understanding. I'm just saying there's a time and place for everything. It's really a concept here. So before they answer the short-term questions, I just talked about long-term. Now let me talk about what is a short-term. What actually matters first, and I say this quite a lot, is the business model even feasible? Those are just my words. We're going to break it down to what I mean by feasible. But how will I make money? What does it really cost to deliver this product or service? Doesn't matter. And will enough people actually pay for it? A lot of times when people feel as though a business model is feasible, they only look at partial reality. There's a demand because my cousins are buying, that's a bit of exaggeration, but you see where I'm going. I learned a lot of time ago that I started teaching when I taught at USC and Pepperdine that a business model to be successful from a financial perspective must have enough customers. And whatever that number is, it's got to have enough that are willing to pay a high enough price, whatever that means cost structure wise, whatever that price is, to have enough money left over to pay for the production. Well, service businesses have production as well. And to cover the cost of goods, that's what I'm talking about, to pay for production and to pay for overhead expense, and then have enough money left over to pay for the shareholder and then have reinvestment into the company. I have seen a lot of companies go through bankruptcy in my, 30, 40 years of private business. Some of them I said, we need to go through bankruptcy. It was to a point where they needed to. Every single company that has ever gone through bankruptcy that I've seen, and most, I tell you most, they have sales. It's not that they don't have sales. It's they don't have enough sales with enough customers paying a high enough price to cover all the cost and have money left over. So what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing this in life as well, is we seem to have flipped the order. You flip the order. Instead of providing or proving, instead of proving the idea can work and it can generate cash, many are spending time and money building the legal and the tax wrapper around a business that hasn't proven it can stand on its own yet, or even gone far enough to get to a legal risk, to get to a tax requirement. So it's not even just proving it, it's venturing down to get to that point. When I have individuals that are talking about being incorporated right away, I always express to them, I found this one story and people get it. I go, can you imagine somebody graduating from high school and saying, I plan on having 3 kids, so I'm going to buy a 3-bedroom house? Well, you wouldn't do that. You can't afford it. And what are you doing with a 3-bedroom house because you want to have 3 kids? Well, a lot of these corporation decisions, these trademark decisions, all of these decisions we're making today don't need to be made. And I keep trying to bring people back. What does or what is required right now in your company? What is right in front of your face that if you made a decision today, it can set you up for success for the future? A lot of times when I see people getting incorporated, even in LLC too soon, that $800 could have went to marketing. Okay. That money spent on a trademark definitely could have gone to more marketing, and nobody even wants to steal the name yet. So why are we doing this? And what happens? So with this flipping, what I'm calling inverting, it often leads to exhaustion, it's confusion, it's spending resources on every setup cost instead of validating and launching the actual product or service. In this, I think many that are in my age group were actually advantaged when they started out. We didn't have the confusion of all these decisions, all these things to distract us from the main concept of starting the company and what it takes to succeed. And what I do is I literally am seeing people getting exhausted by just chasing all of these things that really, really don't matter. And it's hard for me to explain it to people because it's the first time they had experience with me on a call. And I'm so contrarian to the noise that they're hearing in the background. No, you need to be incorporated. You need to protect yourself. We talked about that. The LLC doesn't protect like you believe it will. So it's really hard for them to hear the contrarian view. And I've tried to find all of these different ways of explaining it, like the buying a house, so they can step back and look at it. Now, I think there's a true cost to this. This isn't just a philosophical thing I'm talking about. There is a very true cost. And I think it's a personal one eventually. It always lands on the person. Because remember, businesses aren't these separate entities outside of the legal, separate and unique distinction. They're humans, they're people. Okay. We can get so caught up in life that we forget that there's people. These are people. And that's what I see as the toll and the questions on could the company have succeeded if they focused on other things? Would they have had resources? And then, of course, the emotional toll when they get government letters saying that they didn't keep up with something. I hear that quite a lot. I like to always identify, and I do this across the board. It's a new habit that I've formed for myself. And I can tell you a little bit of where it came from because it's applied to the business as I notice it there, but it's a hard lesson I learned personally. But I'm now becoming very conscious of short-term versus long-term. And not in the way I used to. The way I used to, it was like long-term, you got to plan long-term. If you don't make this decision short-term, you're going to mess up. You're not going to have it last. All these different things that come into play. I can now see we've been feared in to long-term mistakes on short-term decisions to the point where at maybe a time we should have thought more long-term than short-term. Now we're thinking more long-term than we need to be. It's like we've gone over, the scales have tipped to the other side, right? So I'm starting to do this where I step back and I ask myself, does this long-term decision really matter? Is the short-term situation screaming at me where the long-term would not even happen? People talk about, well, I want to be incorporated so I can have an investor someday. Well, you don't have an investor today. So if you turn around and spend the money to incorporate, you may not even have the ability to get off the ground. Then you spend all that money and you're got to dissolve the company, things like that. But once again, people aren't being told the truth. When I tell somebody, and let's talk about the investor one for a second. I go, let's imagine this in our mind's eye for a second. An investor, this, alleged investor, which I've been around investors, it's like I'm not speaking from not having experience of this. I've been a banker around the investment crowd, the whole 9 yards, right? So picture that an investor comes up and says, God, I love your product or service. It's a great company. I really want to invest in it. So say that happens. Let's look at it like it happens, right? And then the investor, which at this point, we're talking about a sophisticated individual, the investor says, however, I have to walk away from it. You're a sole prop. You're an LLC. I really need you to be a corporation. Thank you. Have a great day. No, guys. What happens is the investor is going to say, Well, part of the memorandum of understanding, you need to be a corporation and we'll have our legal team pay to have you incorporated because we really want to make sure it's done correct. Yeah, that's what happens. But yet you go into these universities and they're being told you have to be a corporation for an investor. Well, there's truth in that, okay? You have to have stock. You can't have somebody own stock equity without stock, okay? So there is absolute truth in that. There's truth in everything. But there's also truth in you don't have to be a corporation today. And if you invest in a proper lawyer, you're going to spend 5 to 10,000. If you do it yourself, you're probably going to get some of those documents incorrect because corporations are not DIY. And then you end up with a whole set of problems. So it's the ability to step back and say, do I really need to make that long-term decision today? Or is there something I can do on the short term that I then can see where I'm going and what happens next that may provide me, and here's the key, guys, may provide me with more information for me to then reassess. And at that point in time, once I get more, I call it data points, it may change and I'll go in a different direction. And so what happens is when we start making these long-term decisions ahead of where we are today, we don't allow the natural occurrence, the natural life occurrence of direction pulling us in a way where new data points will suggest an alternate choice. So what I've started becoming aware of is there is another way of looking at it. Yes, what is right in front of my face that I need to solve today? I'm not profitable. Is this something that's going to solve the short term or long term? Get an investor. Don't have an investor today and they're not going to invest if I'm not profitable. I'm just using an obvious one, for example. This also occurs in very subtle things that we can talk about in a bit. So then I go, well, will that long-term decision cause a direction that maybe ends up not appropriate or disallows a focus on a short-term decision that will get me somewhere else? It's that old learning to walk. Yeah, we have to look up to make sure we're not going to run into something, but you're not looking 4 blocks to take a first step, guys. If you are, you're not watching where you're going and you're going to fall over the rock in front of you. That's actually a really good analogy. I mean, if you think about it, we walk every day and we know how to be observant of what's in our path directly, how to know where we're trying to go, and then come back to being observant what's in our path. We wouldn't say, well, I know there's a rock in my path, but I'm going to ignore that right now. That's really not a priority because I know I want to be in 3 blocks in 10 minutes. Well, if you stumble over that rock and fall, you're going to miss your 3 blocks in 10 minutes or whatever the rule is, right? And actually, I love that analogy. I may have to start using it because I think it's a really good one to explore, that you're so caught up in these short-term decisions that you're actually causing yourself more harm in reaching any long-term goals. When I would teach internal staff within a company, whether it was a controller or who, to be more proper in their accounting and financial methods. In other words, coming in as a CFO, which I still do, interim CFO, and I'm always trying to get my clients to be independent. I'm not one of those that come in and want a dependency forever. I like my freedom. So I'd rather come in, take control, figure out the problem, and then advise and help lead the client forward to solve it themselves and eventually become independent with maybe only check-in from me. That's how I function as a CFO. So when I do it, I always have to teach this mindset, especially today when so many people have grown up with a computer where you just push buttons and see what happens, right? In finance and business decisions, you don't want to just push buttons and see what happens, right? So you have to kind of step back. And so I make them actually do this physical activity. Okay, you ready? So whenever we're looking at numbers together, and I teach this in my webinars, if any of you attend my webinar, I make them go, that's interesting. Well, why am I doing that? Everybody kind of do that together with me. Just think about it for a second. Just notice what you feel inside. That's interesting. Notice how it moves you backwards naturally in your thought process. You're no longer in panic mode to choose the next thing. It just naturally, curiosity is what it's doing. It's naturally drawing you back for a second. It's observing facts. That's interesting, but it's not concluding on the action you're taking based on those facts. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get people to not conclude an action based on the fact, but rather let more facts and more information come into play, right? And so that approach, whenever I look at anything, I try to step back and go, that's interesting. It also evokes a series of questions if you let it naturally flow. What do I notice about this situation? What am I noticing about other financial reports or whatever's happening in your life? Does this really matter to me? What really matters to me? I can even be watching a social media with advice and go, well, what's their criteria? Is my criteria the same? How do I know that this is actually factual? Could there be other data points that I want to look at? I say discernment a lot, and I always think about when I say discernment, it's a word and everybody's like, oh yeah, we need discernment, but I feel like I never really define it in what does it look like? What activities do you take? Well, discernment comes through questions is what it does. It's stepping back and going through a series of questions. So if everybody played a game with me right now, and let's just everybody imagine your own business model wherever you are. You could be doing this for 20 years. You could be just started. You could have an idea. Let's imagine our business model. Okay. And it can be whatever is concerning you this morning. You could have woke up and said, hey, I'm concerned about sales. I'm concerned about money. I'm concerned about whatever, right? Or it could just be the business model in general. If you start to look at it and say, what am I noticing? Not what am I being told I should notice, but what am I noticing? Am I noticing something about the sales? Am I noticing that I don't have any money in the bank account? Am I noticing that I don't have enough money to buy inventory? Am I noticing that I'm working 20 hours a day? I'm exaggerating that, but you get what I'm saying. I'm working excessive hours and I still don't have enough money to pay for somebody. What am I noticing? What exactly am I noticing? What do I feel is attached to it? Okay, now when I say what do I feel is attached to it, and I'm really taking you in my mind, how I think about it, how I dissect business models. And I'm using my words selectively because I'm trying to create a different mindset for you. When I say what is attached to it, it's really, I have to use some of my live examples right now, and I'll maybe tell you about this before I end today. I'm doing a lot of mechanical things right now. Let's say it's wiring, plumbing, construction. And I have to always look at, if I put this board against this, what is it attached to? If I put this wire, what is this wire attached to? Because I know whatever it's attached to, I may accidentally modify something I can't. Or I could be over here focusing on this, but it's really attached to this and I'm not focusing on it. So I have to kind of go, okay, here is the problem. This board has to be attached. This wire needs to come out. This piece needs to be taken out. I need to secure this. Well, if I secure it to this, what is this attached to? And how will this happen? This is strategic thinking 101, guys. So when you look at it and you apply it to a business model, we're back in our mindset. We're thinking through our business model and we're looking at our issue. I'm not saying to you, note, I'm not saying what is the cause of this. Okay, I'm not saying what is the cause because this preconceives us to assume we know the cause. And I'm saying, let's pretend we don't. Let's pretend we don't. What is attached to it? If it's sales, what's attached to it? What activities? Well, what's also attached to sales? The selling price, which could also be attached to the profitability. You're not selling at a high enough price. What is attached into the sales? This specific customer base, this market. Is this customer base the one I can be selling to, or do I have to sell to a bigger customer base? Meaning, I shouldn't say bigger. I should say, do I have to sell to one more willing to spend more money to be profitable? Well, if I sell to one willing to spend more money, do I have to make any changes in my product or service to get that acceptable? Or do I have to go the other way and decrease the way my product or service is manufactured or delivered in order to be able to match up with the lower price points? But you see how I'm trying to dissect the attachments and I'm mapping it out. Because as I said so often to you, businesses, remember, they're humans. They're just humans. These aren't these things that sit around in a room by themselves. They're humans. Humans are holistic. We know if we are stressed, our body's going to suffer. We know if our body's ill, our minds and emotions are suffering. We're holistic. Businesses are the same. And when you start dissecting, you look at, well, am I selling at the right price point? Nope, it's not going to be profitable. Am I ever going to be this profitable? How do I go about this? And you stop just going on a social media for one answer. You literally, not to bring up something gross, but remember when all of you did the dissection of the frogs in school? Somebody's gonna have to put in the Q&A or the chat. Do you still dissect frogs in school, or am I old and everybody's going, you dissected a frog in school? I don't even know if you still did that. So that may have been an incorrect statement, but I'm going back to the frog dissecting in school. We learned to take apart one little piece and looked at what it was connected to. I haven't thought about frogs dissected in school in a very long time. But that's where you have to start picking apart the business model and look at the mechanics. And that's what I talk about cost structure. I'm talking about the financial look into the mechanics of it. It is my belief that unless guinea pigs, Chris, that's funny. It is my understanding and belief that unless we step back as entrepreneurs and we start to really change our processes of thinking and stop running like chickens with our head cut off and go through all these different decisions without really thinking them through, we're not going to get the level of success that the past businesses had. And I'm not talking about being Sam Walton. I'm not talking about that, guys. I'm not talking about IPOs or being a corporation. I am really talking a little bit more close to home. Getting paid for your time investment, enough money to pay your personal bills and have a happy life. That's literally what I'm talking about. Years ago, I saw a lot more of that taking place in my, I'm 62 now, been in business 25, many years. I feel as though I saw more greater percentages of small companies enjoying what they're doing, making money, living a good life, not working excessively. I saw a lot more of that back then, a lot more than I see now. And I think it's because they didn't have the noise and the chatter outside, and they just followed their intuition about what makes sense, what's next, what needs to be done. And they stayed true. I don't know what other word to call it. Maybe you guys have a better word, but I'm going to say core values. Core values is a word that means these are the things that matter the most and will determine an outcome. So core values can be in a person, but core values are in companies too. I don't care if you're selling online or you have a brick and mortar. If you're not bringing in enough money to cover production expenses, overhead, and have money for yourself and reinvestment, it ain't going to work. It just ain't. And like I've talked to you guys so much, this thought of we're going to make money when someday, you got to look at when will that absolutely happen? So I noticed Brenda has a question in there. I'm going to stop my rambling for a second. I'll come back to wherever we go, but let me get Brenda's question. Private practice speech therapy businesses have to take insurance. Oh, yes. And Brenda, I think you've heard me talk about taking insurance many times, so I'm very familiar with that. Unfortunately, insurance reimbursement rates continue to go down while premiums rise. Brenda, you are right on cue. Absolutely. What are some of the ways to market to private pay clients to entice them to pay for services and not use their health insurance? First of all, Brenda, I love this question. Thank you so much for asking it. Now, many of you are going to think Brenda's asking a question very specific to healthcare. Now, it is, granted, this is a dilemma specific to healthcare, and I'll talk why, but it's across the board dilemma. This is something that is exactly what I was just speaking about, Brenda. You are completely on cue. Just kind of a little history on this that I think is interesting. Many things that have happened in my career, I didn't quite understand at the time. It's true of life, right? And then later I go back and look at it and go, I get it. And Brenda, you might find this interesting. So I can't remember, but this has to be at least, let me guess here, guys, 20 years ago. I came on a small company And it came in as marketing and ended up, strange story, but I ended up running it for a while as the CEO. And what that company did is they set up, and let me explain what I mean by this, but they set up medical facilities, meaning when a doctor was going to start a new office, they sold the chairs, they sold the Welch Allen, I think it was, equipment, etc. So they would help establish the inner workings, equipment, and the furnishings for this doc in the box, as they called it back then. Well, after I came on board, there was this huge push to the doctors to consolidate, especially in California, that's where I was, and form their own practice, IPAs, independent physician associations, right? Because the insurance providers were not supporting the individual docs anymore. They wanted them to be in a group, right? So suddenly, all of the doctors were having to group together into some kind of practice and form their own entity to get better insurance rates, et cetera, because the insurances were basically causing this to happen. And I would go to a lot of these medical association meetings. Somebody can correct me, it's been so long, but it was like AMGA or some American Medical Group Association. They had these big conferences. And there was a lot of lawyers and financial people that would sit in these meetings. And I just did it to sell to people that were at it. That was my goal, networking. But, I'm always interested in topics, so I would listen to them. And they would talk about how it's ruining medicine and that it's causing the doctors to go into these consolidated facilities to get insurance, and patients were going to suffer and doctors were going to suffer. And I didn't know because I just didn't understand, right? And now I can see 20 years later how this has created the exact same situation that Brenda's dealing with today. And when I see these big facilities, by the way, there was this one facility that we ended up doing. It was 30,000 square feet and 11 to 13 doctors that came together under one roof. It was a year-long project. I flew out to Sacramento and then drove from there every single week to go on this site on this project. And it was a situation where they were building, this is fascinating too, Brenda, it feeds into what we're talking about. They were building this huge facility. These doctors were leaving the hospital they were at, and they believed, and I was only there for medical equipment and furniture, but I was meeting with the consultant, and they were creating it for a PPO situation. So they were creating a nicer facility, right? And their thoughts were they were going to get the higher paid PPO. And I checked in a year later. This was a huge project that went on for like a year and a half, and found out that the facility was not doing well. The IPA was not doing well. And what happened is they hadn't researched earlier to find out that they were in an area. They were in a physical location. It was kind of up in Northern California where the farming and the industrial is, which really does pay more for HMOs to go in. And so they created this beautiful PPO that didn't have the drive for people to pay outside of the HMO. And it ended up that they really needed, and they said to me one time, I'll never forget it, they said they really needed a facility more for herding cattle and getting people through the door quickly than the enticing aesthetics that they created, right? And so it was failing for that reason. So I have really watched the transition from the business side of healthcare in general and providing of services, speech pathology, anything, whatever comes under that insurance. Now, at the same time, what I've seen is an interesting situation, and applies to people, so you guys can tell me if this resonates with you or not, because I'm not saying I'm right on this, but it seems to me I'm hearing more and more people, I know I'm speaking from my own biography, that I don't want to just go into the system and get anything in the system. I'd rather, I'm really healthy. I don't go to medical doctors at all. I'm very holistic in nature, but I don't see where we benefited. I think we're getting worse care. I don't think we're getting better care, right? And I'm seeing more and more people are willing to dish out money, go to independent providers, go holistic routes rather than just jump into like Kaiser Permanente and get in line, right? So I think that if there was ever a turning, Brenda, where people are now willing to pay outside of their pocket, it is now. But I'm tying back in my story about the big facility that designed itself for a PPO, a private pay situation in an HMO environment. It didn't work. So the first thing you have to do, Brenda, is you have to find the clients that have the money. because if you don't have the money, you're not going to buy. But I think you can find plenty of them, because the other thing is you're not a huge $1 million facility that needs that many people trafficking through, right? I have seen, actually, I've looked at several financials for speech therapy businesses. So I've looked at even your exact industry. And when they try to mix a little bit of insurance in, it always harms them. It just, if they only got a few bits, a lower amount of overall clients, patients, whatever you want to call them, they maybe can't get enough of the higher pays in to make for the low. In fact, what I'm saying is the lows from the insurance reimbursement are so low that you got to get this many private pays to make it up. You're better off not having the insurance and just get this many private pays because you're not being pulled down, right? And then get in the cheapest offices, the least expensive way to do it, offer it online if you can. You've got to drive the cost down. And then what you have to do is get in, can I say, the mindset of the person you're delivering the services to. And if I was to say in general two messages, I'm not saying the words, but I think there's two messages that need to be communicated, and both of them are important. So let's go through both of them. Let me give you first both. And this applies to everybody, okay? The first one is why buying directly from you is an advantage. Now, I think too much we're doing it in fear. Well, you won't do it. No. What will I experience? I think that the people are really wanting to hear, why should I come to you to get something I want? Not, well, if you don't, then this is going to happen. I think we're too much in the world of, well, if you don't use this product, and if you don't do this, and if you don't speak this way, and you don't act this way, blah, 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 blah. I know I'm like, shut up. Tell me what is going to give me what I want. So when you identify the lovely experience, whatever that may be, I'm just saying lovely experience, I mean nothing by those words, but it's the experience. If I come to you, what am I going to experience? So I can go, hey, that's what I want to experience. That is it. I want to experience that. Now, the minute I get that connection and say, yeah, I want to experience that, the next thing I have to do is say, I can afford. And a lot of times for healthcare insurance or anything insurance wise, having people know they can pay outside and how that works, because the industries have trained us something. Can I talk about something else on this, guys? And please, anybody knows what I'm talking about, you comment on this or whatever. Okay, let me elaborate because I'm still on the same topic. Industry has trained us to believe private pay is outrageously expensive and insurance is going to make you and save you. Okay. I have learned over the years that private pay can negotiate sometimes cheaper than what if you added up your insurance premium, right? So private pay, I mean, if I got a long-term illness, maybe not. I'm not saying that, but I have gone in for food poisoning. I had food poisoning once, right? Went in for food poisoning and just said, okay, I'm a private payer. How much does it cost? Can I pay this? Yep. And I looked at the bill and I was like, oh my friggin' God, that's less than 2 months premium. I just came out ahead of time, right? And then I started hearing other people who actually were private paying to not hit their insurance because they didn't want their insurance to go up. And so I'm not saying anything is or is not, guys. I'm just saying that maybe the world isn't what we're being told in all areas. That's all I'm saying. Maybe the world isn't what we're being told, right? So when people have been conditioned, and that's what I'm saying conditioned to believe that private pay is out of their reach, you have to explain to them how they can afford it and a process to pay. And even maybe, and I'm throwing it out there just for ideas, I'm not saying it works, a suggestion that this session would cost this amount, and tell them. Because see, a lot of people are just not even asking or considering it because they think it's out of their league. Okay. Like the person who can't afford a Ferrari is not going to go in shopping for a Ferrari for the most part, right? So if they're seeing the private pay like a Ferrari, you got to say, no, this is something you can afford. Look, and this is how it would work. So my answer to you is, let me come back full circle. You first have to communicate with a group of individuals that are able to and desire to pay. outside of insurance? Able to. Let's just say able to first. Let's just say able to, because if they're not able to, you don't have somebody that can pay. That's a given. Then you need to communicate in a way to show them what are they going to experience. Now it implies what they're going to experience that they won't experience here. So it applies a difference, but it implies, well, why should I pay versus going through this? What experience will I have? And that can go in many different avenues. And if you look at what people actually want versus what we market to them that they want, often it can be two different things, right? So you find the right place to market the right people. You're communicating with the right audience. You're giving the right message, really. You're communicating the experience they will have. And then what you do is you then show them how they can pay. Give them some guidance, maybe set up a discussion, maybe have a private pay page on your website that explains the process for a private pay. What I'm really saying, Brenda, is open their eyes that private pay is available and it's an option and it can be used. I remember, back when I was a little girl and my father worked at the Ford plant. Like I told you guys, I come from a blue collar working family, and we had Blue Cross and Blue Shield. I mean, now we're talking very long time ago. There was a certain amount that my mother would have to pay, to take us to the doctors, but we hardly ever got taken to the doctor because I grew up in the country and I had that country mindset from my upbringing. So we went into mom's medicine cabinet for almost everything. But if we were really sick, we went and she knew the bill and she paid a percentage, even though, my father worked at Ford Plan, had a good insurance plan. They all were set up that way. I really like those days better because I think it left control in the person. I think we've sold out a bit of control, but that's a whole nother topic. So first of all, Brenda, am I touching on things? Does this make sense? I just want to say one last thing before I end, Brenda. It's possible. I have seen it. I have been with several different companies in this world and a speech therapy company in general that they've had to slowly get off of the insurance and they just learned how to find some good clients and referrals, etc. And when things are real important to us, especially when they involve our health and well-being, believe me, people will dig in their pocket as long as they understand they can and what it will get them. So hopefully that helped. I noticed Jill put, I'm planning on dropping my insurance soon and going private pay. I think there's a paying of $950 per person, but I understand it may be cheaper over the year. I don't know what you mean about the tax because, there was a tax penalty, Jill, that if you didn't carry I'm sorry, let me say that again. If you didn't carry insurance, you got penalized when Obamacare come out. That's been removed. So if you're talking about that, that's been removed. And full disclosure, I dropped my insurance. I did it, I think 3-4 years ago. I didn't like what I was seeing, and I decided that I wouldn't be utilizing their services anyway. And I am never sick, and I'm holistic anyway. And if I had to go on long-term cure, I would rather decide my time was up on planet Earth, right? That was just my personal decision. And I struggled with that because it seems so irresponsible, et cetera. And maybe it is. I'm not telling anybody to do that. But I'm just saying, and my only point is, these are the kind of things that we can think about and we can say, does this make sense? I think we're not doing enough of, does this make sense? So yes, thank you. That's the penalty. That's what, in California, there's still a penalty. Oh, that could be. I was talking about the federal penalty. Thank you for clarifying that. I was absolutely talking about the federal penalty. I was not talking about the California one. Thank you. Yeah, in California different, but I was talking about the federal one. Yeah, of course, in California. Isn't that true? Yeah, thank you. I didn't even think federal or California, to be honest. You're right. I had my head on the federal one and didn't even think on the California one. But yeah, but thank you for sharing that. You're right. So any other questions on that before I go to something else? Any other questions on that concept? I think I covered it and hopefully that helped, Brenda. But I think that, like I said, these are situations where, and I want to go back into the question just in general. You're very welcome, Brenda. I think that what I liked about the question is most people just put their head down, and you may have already done that and just said, I got to get more insurance. I got to get more insurance. I got to get more insurance pays, right? But the problem with that is if you if you go that route without stepping back and asking, well, is this the right way? Is there another way that you could do that? Then you don't get to have these kind of conversations. So that's what I'm saying, is that a lot of times just stepping back and asking these kind of questions really, really benefit. And I, have to go back to a concept that I've been thinking about also while we're on delicate conversations, is that it seems to me, and you guys can tell me what's going on or tell me if my thoughts are wrong. It seems to me for the newer entrepreneurs, profitability doesn't matter as much as for the older entrepreneurs. And at the end of the day, it actually does. I know I talked about that on Lori's Corner for a second, but it seems as though everybody focuses on all of these other things, from the legal to trademark, and I can go on, and they never really feel the importance of doing a complete financial plan outside of putting some numbers into some software to see what really matters financially, what really matters, and if you are profitable. And I think that's another thing we have to do, is to get the quart of milk. We have to turn back and go into a state of analyzing whether this is going to be profitable and if it's going to be profitable long term. And on that, I want to chat a little bit about something else, another realization I came to. And this I didn't formulate into words perfectly, so bear with me as I talk about it. One of the things I was thinking, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but I'm thinking, saying it's something that we have to consider. When you look at companies today going back 20, 30 years ago, I told you that they had it easier, they were more profitable. I can tell you that from my experience on it. But most of the companies, especially the ones I deal with on a daily basis, are, we would call it business terms, decentralized. So what you have, and I see this across the board except for the services, the core services are still being offered by an individual, but somebody's maybe selling a product, even if it's their own. They have a company that is manufacturing it. They may have a company that is distributing it. They may have a company that is shipping it. They may have a company that helps run the customer service. They may have another company or an individual that is also managing the sales on the website, et cetera. Then they have an individual doing their bookkeeping. You get what I'm saying, okay? So when you look at the internal structure, technically, they have all the infrastructure, and I'm going somewhere with this, guys, stay with me. Technically, they have all the infrastructure, but they have it through all these other companies, and they're putting together the infrastructure that way. Now, I'm not saying this is good or bad. Stay with me on where I'm going with this. But whereas years ago, say somebody sold a product, they probably created most of it themselves or had their families doing it. They probably sold it locally. They sold it themselves. They maybe had a staff of 1 to 2, 3 people. They didn't go and say, I'm going to create a company. Oh, here's a commercial kitchen. Here's somebody that'll make this. I can buy this from China pre-made. I'll buy the boxes pre-made. They just kind of figured out how to be resourceful, and with themselves or maybe some local help or some employees or some family members, all of those things that are currently being outsourced immediately from day one. Even when, I see the students in college thinking of the idea, they're already thinking about what partners they're going to come up with. They call them partners, which is fine. I'm not saying anything against the word. I'm just explaining the situation, right? Now, what that does, and what I'm seeing a lot. So here's the twist. Okay, everybody with me so far? Here's the fascinating twist. Where I'm seeing the money being made today, like I always tell you, it's a solopreneur that's selling their own expertise. That's hands down. If I look at a lot of numbers. If I'm looking at somebody that's making 6 figures plus, it's the individual selling their own services all the time, right? Could be a massage therapist, could be a consultant, doesn't matter, but it's the individual selling their own services. They're making 6 figures now. But when I look next, it is the providers of those outsourced services. So the company that is making the boxes, the company that is handling the shipping, the company that is handling the sales and marketing, the company that is making the product and putting it in the package and selling it to you. So even if this is your own idea, like I just talked to a client the other day, and this is common. She created her own formula. She created her own skincare creams. She then went to another layer of sales, or I should say level of sales. So immediately it needs all this product on it. It needs this safety testing. It needs all of these things because it's no longer at the farmer's market. It's on main shelves, right? So the amount of money for her, and this is the key, this is where I finally came to this realization, the amount of money for her per product, given her number of sales, we're not talking about millions of bottles of this, right? Even though she's selling a good amount, she's in the hundred thousands of sales, right? She's up there. But even though she's selling a good amount, she's not selling a million of these things, right? A million products, right? And so the amount of money that she has to pay and outsource with not only the testing, but then she has somebody create the jars, then they put the jars together and then they ship them to her and then they distribute it. All this money is going out, and it's these companies that are making money because in essence, they're basically sticking to the core competencies. I create formulas. I put them in jars. I ship them. But because of the entrepreneur is having to pay so much more for each of these together, if the entrepreneur can't get a high enough selling price to cover all that, the entrepreneur is never going to make that much money because all the money is paid in the back end, right? So they're never going to, unless perhaps they not only increase sales incrementally, they got to go into the million, 2 million to get that volume. And when they get that volume, they're usually lowering some of the quality of the product, right? So there's this middle ground where our companies today are starting by outsourcing so many of the services that there really isn't enough money to be left over to be profitable. And she's been at this 9 years, and the products are gorgeous. I mean, they're great. They're awesome. I looked at them the other day. She sent me some, and I was like, oh my God, I've been with her since day one, right? These are awesome. But as she's starting to realize, she said, I want to make some money now. I'm really not making much money. And I looked at it and said, the question is how? How would you get there? And it's a dilemma that needs to be considered. Now, what am I saying? I'm going to come full circle, guys. This means when I say when you're starting up, if the business model is feasible or not, that it has to do with not looking at, and this is where long-term matters, brainstorming, long-term brainstorming. If you're planning on someday hoping that your product is sold somewhere on a shelf, etc., looking then into the cost of what it would be, not jumping down on the ship and, hiring somebody to do a trademark, hiring all this, hiring somebody to produce it. But say, if I get there, what is it going to cost? Do I have enough selling price today? Because if you start selling it at a certain price, you're going to have to raise it. You are. So you can either go and market to a new client base at a higher price point when you get there, which is definitely a route you can take. You suddenly just increase the price when you sell in the distribution, or you start at a higher price in the beginning, or you kind of do a little bit of both. You don't price it like, well, I'm working on my home, I'm using my own stuff, it doesn't matter, I'll just make a few dollars. No, you got to price it high enough so you can at least get ready for that jump. And then when that jump happens, you just don't get to keep the same selling price. So if somebody says, I want to distribute this, how much it would be, you may have to rethink that selling price. So in conclusion, you really have to figure out what long-term may affect the short-term decisions you're making today, but be more inquisitive into your own desires. Because if you say, I'm not really trying to distribute this all over the place. If I sell this at my farmer's market or a few local stores, this will be fine. That's one decision. Just automatically going, hey, I'm going to have 3 kids in a big house. Instead of saying, well, what do I really want to focus on? Am I willing to understand that at some point I may have to change my price, or I'd have to offer a different price at a higher price point to make up for my new scenario? I think the summary is life happens to companies just like life happens to individuals. And if we start breaking it down accordingly, where we realize we can't plan out everything in our life, and we can't make the choices today when we're 20 that we're going to need to make at 40. But we also can't continue at 40 with the same decisions we made at 20, like it doesn't affect us anymore. I think that's a good way of looking at it. So this is a way for you to sit back and look at long-term versus short-term, say, that's interesting, and start understanding what matters, what's a priority, and what's not. I think our business models have changed significantly, and we have to acknowledge it financially and from a long-term feasibility. If we keep making choices in our business models and our startup and the ones we make on a daily basis like that hasn't, we end up where we're at it for a very long time period. And then what happens is you still aren't where you need to be and you end up shutting it down. So I think we really have to step back and look at it like it's a new world that we're creating with our business models, with our clients, with insurance, with all this, and just not take anything for granted. If anything, just wake up tomorrow, look at your company as if you've never ever seen it before, and start to dissect it. Dissect it like the guinea pig or the frog. Take it apart. Look at what is attached to what. What choice here impacts this choice? How does it change it today? How does it change tomorrow? I guarantee anybody who stayed here with me through this long discussion, if you get up tomorrow and you start asking these questions and really start dissecting and think where you're at and where you're going and what are your issues and what's attached and what needs to be decided today, what does not, and what do you really want out of this, it will give you the type of audit to not answer your questions, but begin a very, very important strategic financial dialogue. Yep, I'm an enrolled agent. Yep, I'm a CFO. Yep, I'm the resident expert on legal structures. And when I think things through, it's that simple in my mind, guys. I use my knowledge to answer the complicated questions. I use my intuition and my simplicity and my open awareness and looking at reality as it is to ask the right questions, to break down the detail, and to not get emotionally ego-based or caught up in anything anybody tells me that I should do, could do. It's done this way. I don't know that they're right. They may not be right for me. Okay. So I always say, take our power back. Take our power back. Be in control of your decisions. Sit back from a position of thinking, analyzing, asking questions. Get out of the hype. Get out of the hype and start looking at it, because guys, what I'm seeing out there is ugly. It's not being profitable. It's struggling and struggling on business models. Like I told you, I can look at them within 2 seconds financially and see they're never going to make it. And we want to all have a good life. We want to have a happy life. We want to have a business that supports us. And at the end of the day, it's a 3D monopoly game we're on. I always tell you that. We got to be able to pay the bills. I've never seen anybody happy that can't pay their bills. It's just a fact, right? So there has to be a meeting of the business model supporting our personal and financial goals. And that's what I'm talking about, is looking at it in a new way where maybe the latest social media, all likes video doesn't control what we think we need to do next, but we do, and we all see it. I see it like Charlie Brown. Wah, 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 remember the teacher? But I see it as data points. I don't ignore it, but I see it as data points. So that's my discussion for today on not really knowing what I was going to talk about. So Brenda, thank you for the question, because I think it led to something that every single person can relate to. And if there's any other thoughts that you want to put into the chat or any thoughts on the Q&A, we got about 2 minutes. I'm going to let Sadie come back into this. And if, it was just a rant that didn't make sense, I understand that too. Sadie, I filled the time as I always do.
Well, my favorite is it's like there's never any doubt in my mind where I'm just like, you know what? It doesn't matter. We're going to learn. We're going to grow. And I think that's what happens when, and I think I shared this with you before, like when you are a knowledgeable and charismatic person, all we're doing is just sharing information, right? Like that's what we do in a small biz community. Because I think, I don't even know if the word is trendy anymore, right? But it's called gatekeeping. Like before, I think it was all about gatekeeping and just like, no, like this is knowledge, you're going to have to pay me. And I'm like, you know what? It's like, we can share a little bit, you can share a little bit of knowledge of free. And I'm like, but if it takes a little bit of time, right? I'm like, that's why people have hourly rates. Share a little bit of knowledge, but we're not going to go broke, for other people, I guess is maybe my balancing way of saying that.
That's very, very true. Like I said, I think it's time to bring our power back. So with that, Sadie is going to stay later as she always does. There, she'll collect any information that you want to know about, and we'll look at it next time a guest doesn't show up, which could be next week. I don't know. I got to juggle next week. We'll see. If you want to be a guest on the show, remember it's not about, oh, I succeeded or I made it there. It's what telling your story, talking about something that other people relate to. So please get in touch with me or anybody you know that wants to be a guest, or anybody, maybe you have somebody that supports you in your company that's very good company and they could come on and talk about what they do. It's really an open forum for you. And I'd love to get some guests on outside of my immediate audience, I guess you could say, that I know to bring on the show. So please reach out to anybody else. Thank you for being there. Thank you for listening. And I will see you next week on Small Biz Talk with your host, Lori Williams. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Lori. All righty, guys, you know the drill. We're gonna hang out for a little bit just to make sure you guys got all the clicks, because we never know. Sometimes we have a new person that, heard about the show and they're like, what's the Small Biz Talk? So I put all the links in terms of like how to contact the SBDC. If you yourself want to be a guest on Small Biz Talk, or if you know someone that would be good. And like we said, it's not about success stories, it's about your story. That's all it has to be. Hey, like let's grow and learn together, folks. Alrighty, so I'm going to put myself on mute. Let me know if you need anything in particular. And other than that, I hope everyone enjoys the game tonight.